Hi, my name is Edward Madojemu. I'm a concept artist and animator, and I've sometimes developer. And I've been experimenting for the past couple of years with like VR animation using Quill and other VR tools in tandem with like real-time filmmaking and game development tools like Unity. And today I'll be breaking down a scene from my grad film, Lightcatchers, which was animated almost entirely using VR tools. Almost everything you see on screen was mostly made with Quill and animated by hand with some other tools here and there. And I'll be breaking down the scene that I'm about to play for you and how I approached making it. Okay, so I'm gonna just play this scene real quick.
Yes! Woo!
So that's the opening scene to the film, and I'm gonna just show you how everything was put together and what the approach was for this project. So now I am going to pop into Quill. A moment. Okay. Ah. Okay, there we go. Can you guys see?
Yes.
Awesome. So first things first, I think I'm just going to show you the set. So this is the set for my film. The entire film takes place in this room. So it created a really unique opportunity because something I found about VR is it allows you to have like an understanding of space that's really unparalleled anywhere, right?
Mm.
And especially making this film in a pandemic, being able to have a simple like localized space to work with as your entire set created a lot of interesting opportunities about how the film was made. So one of the very first thing I did when I made this was block out the set. Like I had storyboards drawn on paper and stuff like that, well, mostly beat boards, nothing concrete yet, but I ended up building out the set first according to like concept art and stuff like that. And mostly because that allowed me to like not just use the set as a backdrop, but also like let the set's design play into how the character moves around and inhabits the space.
That's super cool. Did you actually scale it, paint it, and design it to real world scales? Or
yes, as much as possible. I tried. Some things here and there you exaggerate, but yeah, for the most part it's to scale. And this isn't actually. This is the animation set because the final set is a bit too heavy to animate in real time code. So this isn't actually the final one. I'll show you the final one in Unity. But
yeah, I love the painterly style that you have here. It really looks, everything looks hand painted. Like
thanks.
Beautiful stuff.
Yeah, thanks. It's and you'll actually see why. So the beauty of this is, while I was making this one, I was also developing the tool set that I was working with in Unity. So side by side, I could kind of go back and forth and see how I could best create my set to work in tandem with Unity. And some of this is from, you can also see some of this in the methodology from the last tutorial I did. But the scene is set up in a way where all the elements are kind of broken up into little pieces where it's not just meshes. There's like different layers to it. For different reasons, because you wanna be able to export and set materials differently, so you can add more effects and heighten the way your environment looks over time. Like for example, the walls. I'm trying to find. Yeah, the walls are really a specific thing. For example, so what I've just turned off is like the outermost layer of the walls. Everything else is detail. So you can kind of see, this is what the walls actually look like.
Yeah.
But then I added this detail layer, and it adds so much already. And what this detail layer is mostly here for is things like, for example, ambient occlusion. Because like my shaders in Unity are like they're pretty stylized, so they don't have the full range of like dynamic lighting. So with a detail, I can put in things like ambient occlusion in places where I know that there's pretty much, in most cases, there's always going to be darkness. So like you're painting some of that detail in, so you don't have to do that on the like in the Unity side, because I find if you plan ahead in terms of knowing what your environment might look like, or what the main points of interest are, you can plan these things ahead of time, and it really enhances the effects. Like for example, there's the shadow on the bed and stuff under the bed and stuff like that. But also this detail layer has a secondary function that I'll show once I get into the Unity stage. But there's all these small considerations made into it, as well as things like these sliding doors are also separate items because they get animated in the film. So there are all these little these considerations here and there that have to be made when I was building my set, so I can really make it feel alive in the final Unity setups.
So, for example, the shadow under the bed, it's painted, but then you would also combine it with a real shadow in Unity?
Exactly. It's cool. So because the beauty of it is the shadows you bake in here will blend into like whatever the lighting settings you have. So you can add the tints you want onto them. So you kind of have your painted lighting here basically functions both as texture but also lighting. So you can kind of
totally
alternate between how you use them. And the same thing with the lines. So the line art is separate as well, because I wanted to do special things with how the lines appear in this film. So yeah, that's just a quick breakdown of the set. But what I'm going to show you next is the characters, which are probably the most complicated part of this whole project. So this was my first time messing around with rigging in Quill. So I always had, in any scene, I always have like a safety backup of my characters, because it's very easy to like have them go off model once you start animating. So there are only two characters in the whole film, these two, right? So this is what their co-models end up looking like. As you can see, they're rather huge in terms of like they're really high poly, and mostly that's because these models weren't meant to be viewed in real time. They're meant to be rendered with lighting, so they're built in a way where their mesh is very much geared towards that. As you can see, like it's mostly singular strokes here and there, so I can have really nice normals when I'm lighting, and I can very precisely control how it looks.
So her head is basically one line brush stroke, right? Almost.
It's actually the sphere brush here. It's just one.
Yeah.
But what I found is, and this is like a neat little trick that's been really helpful.
You bend it with the grab tool, right?
Exactly. You can. Sorry, I'm gonna swap back. Yeah. So you can actually bend it before you optimize.
Yeah.
And that allows you to kind of retain the precise shape, but have it be a bit more optimized, because you don't want it to be too high poly, even if you're rendering it out. Especially because this whole project is supposed to be real time. And yeah, so the rig is really like it's probably the densest rig I've worked with. I'm going to quickly turn on So I rigged everything down to like the fingers.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah, it's a very complicated rig, because I knew because there was a bunch of shots where the character is kind of playing with her phone, and you really want those to feel organic. And I found trying to do it frame by frame was really tricky to get the movements in sync. So I ended up having to go back and rig. It wasn't like a smooth process. I didn't figure it out the first try. I had to keep going back and adding more functionality to the rig as I worked with it. But yeah, it's all the way to that point. But it's a lot of work going in and a lot of planning. But once you get most of it going, it's really efficient and it's really fast in terms of what you can do.
Yeah, I mean, it's just fun to watch how you pose there right now, right? Like, because it's so simple.
It really is. It's like playing with dolls almost. So you can make them move. It's really cool. And even on top of that, I added kind of like a quick face rig. It's pretty basic, but it's So that kind of like a mouth chart you have in 2D because I have a more 2D background. So her face is essentially drawn on. It's a stylistic choice, but it also reaps a lot of benefits in terms of functionality because our faces now don't have to be as complicated. So, for example, her pupils are a separate layer, so I can animate them individually, right? But then I can change her expression on a whim, so I can make her angry, just like that. And I can, right now she has a neutral mouth, but I can make her. So there's all these quick ways to kind of change expressions, and all you have to do when you actually finally animate them is essentially try and just in between them yourself, frame by frame. And I found because of the style, they don't have to be perfect.
So you didn't do it via spans. You just basically copy paste it into a frame by frame layer?
Yes, I ended up making like an acting layer, and I would just kind of pick and choose because it was.
Nice.
I initially used spans, but I found I wanted to, like, at a certain point, you want to contort and stretch the mouth shapes beyond what the rig itself can do. Right. So
and also when you use spans, you can't get it into Unity either, right? So
that too, yeah, it's also harder to. It's hard to bake at the end, and there's also a huge number of considerations when you're baking your animations.
Yeah.
So I'll show that in a sec. So yeah, that's the safety model, but I'm going to just run through the animations and how I approached it here. So usually on animated films, you work on a shot-by-shot basis, right? And initially that was the plan, but then what happened was this project wasn't, I initially had a team. I initially planned this project with the team, but of like volunteers from my school, because usually in art school, right? Animation school, you have people volunteer to work on it, but I found out that once I told people it was a VR animated film, a lot of people were like, I don't know how to do that, and basically I stopped getting like people trying to like volunteering because it just seemed too far out. So I ended up having to do most of the production alone, minus some with the other parts which I'll get into. But
it's such a misconception, right? Like VR makes it actually simpler, but if you compare it to like traditional 3D. But...
Yeah, I feel like it's very daunting for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of thing. So I ended up having to find a way to compensate because I didn't plan for the time I had left, right? So that's essentially why this film became a real-time film, because I realized instead of trying to animate on a shot-by-shot basis, which would be a nightmare in terms of having to animate every single shot, but also like edit it back in manually and all that stuff single-handedly, because if you're the whole production team, I figured, what if I kind of took the logic of a cutscene? Because in video games, right, you have everything happening in the space all at once, but the cinematography is changing dynamically to kind of edit itself on a timeline like a film, instead of having it be a series of shots that you're stitching together. So I did it more of like it's kind of like a set. It's almost like it's closer to theater where everything is happening all at once, but what I'm doing is I'm reframing things around it. So for example, this is one of the shots in the film. So I still had a plan for what all my storyboards and angles were. Like I did all the storyboarding first and all that, but I animated it a bit more freeform. So for example, in the film, this is one shot. She does that, presses her phone, and then it cuts to here before she jumps up. But in here, it's actually just one animation. And this is all done all at once because there's two reasons. It's both the idea of doing it in real time allowed me to change my mind a lot, because at first, most of this shot was actually done from the side. Like it was a different angle, but I realized it was more effective if you saw her emotions up close. And also this was the first time you actually, because sometimes, like this happens all the time in production, you change your mind a lot about how you realize some things don't work. And this actually ended up being the first shot where you clearly see the character's face. So I ended up having to cut to a new shot halfway through this, because after this moment here, she jumps up, right? And we want to really see that movement and how excited and how much ground she's covering when she jumps. So I ended up having to cut this now, and that's the benefit of animating this way, because I essentially animated the film in 15-second chunks almost. Because at a certain point, with the models this complicated, if you go too much further than that, it starts to get really heavy, and you can't really previs everything easily. So I ended up animating a lot of this in 15-second chunks and just stitching them and editing them back together. Yeah, it was, but I found the beauty of that is you can actually just really focus on the performance up until there's moments where you're like, okay, here might be a lot of work to just do things. So like this shot is actually cut up into different pieces. So like there, she jumps here and lands, and then there's another animated loop of her, I think, jumping up and down here, somewhere here. It's really cool.
Oh, so you replace her kind of
Exactly.
into a loop. Yeah.
So it's not always like it doesn't always have to close out perfectly. It's just a matter of, with the storyboard, it's a lot easier to figure out how to separate these things.
Right.
Yeah. So right now you're looking at the actual.
It becomes almost like it becomes almost like live action, right? Like you have the performance takes, right, and then you just edit it and stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. Just like that. It's very much like live action.
So, question about the keyframe animation you did. It looks like, my assumption is that you have almost like a key on every frame, every other frame, and have linear transitions between poses. Right?
Yes.
You did. And did you use quite a bit then the key in all children function to set a key throughout?
I think so. I started animating some of this before that was added, so I'm not too sure if I use it for this one. This is an early shot.
Oh my god, then that must have been like a nightmare without it, right?
It was a bit of a nightmare. You can kind of see a lot of the keyframes. So, for example, a lot of it is kind of just nothing isn't perfectly synced, and I always made sure to animate only what I needed to, because I knew for a fact we weren't going to see her lower body at this point, so I just only animated that. And then you have things like, for example, the hair is done frame by frame. So like I can go down to the layer, which is somewhere in here, and you can see that these are all the keyframes. So after I had done the major movements, I would kind of manually frame by frame do the hair and just bend it, because it's a lot harder to rig stuff like this. You can, but it's
maddening.
Exactly. So it's things like that, and then there's even like, because you can see all the little, like, I think here's where I made use of the keyframes in all children the most. Yeah, because the fingers are so intricate, right? You want to
exactly. Yeah.
But it does yield pretty interesting results once you're done. I would say where it got really difficult is things like her shirt. So that had to be done frame by frame as well to kind of simulate that the clothes are moving. But when you have something with a pattern like this, it's really tricky to do it convincingly. So like a lot of times it doesn't even move in some shots because it just wasn't convincing. But I ended up finding a solution for that later, which I'll get into. But yeah, so something I noticed about Quill is when you want to bake your layers, right? So, you just normally hit sequence, hit loop, and then hit bake. But the problem is when you're exporting this into something like Unity, you want to separate different layers for different kind of materials or different effects. For example, the face, when I'm rendering faces, I make sure they don't accept any light or cast any shadows. So in order to do that, you have to separate that into a new layer. But when you're baking, you can't just turn off, all of the other files. Because right now I can just do this, right? I can turn off whatever part of the body I don't want you to see, and then it'll be fine. But in Quill, when you try to bake, what happens is it doesn't register the group layers visibility. It registers the mesh itself.
Yeah.
So in order to isolate what you want, you actually have to go in and manually turn off each and every single mesh item you don't want to be baked, basically, each time.
Yeah, what I do sometimes is like I run into the same issue for my Redshift and Octane renders, right? So what I usually do is I just duplicate the character layer and delete anything that's in a group. And then,
right. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, that's a quick way to do that. It's not like ideal, but that's how you could do it.
Yeah.
Because then you only have to delete the groups, right? And then
right. Yeah, that's true. I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some of these are nested, so I'd have to probably move them out and bake some other things. But yeah.
I could imagine it's pretty daunting to do the baking one by one.
At first, yeah, it was, but eventually you kind of get into the flow of things. For example, the face. Yeah. So now everything is kind of separated, so I can just.
I love that.
The face is just there, and then. I actually even ended up updating the face, so there's another face.
Hollow Man.
And what I also did is, oh wow, see? So things like this happen all the time. You just have to, this is the version 2. So what I ended up doing is I wanted to kind of give it because I was playing with this notion in the story of like because the intention was this is kind of supposed to be something that the whole story is supposed to be kind of like a folk tale type thing where it's kind of thing your friend will tell you happened to their sister or their friend's friend or something. So I was playing with this idea of reality versus kind of fantasy in that sense. So like sometimes I wanted to have like more realistic feeling motions, and sometimes I wanted something more stop motiony. So like here, what I do is I end up going through the frames and adding like stops to kind of give it that more stepped feeling. So you notice this is a bit more paced out and like more choppy than some of the other movements. So it's things like that I ended up trying to do that's the benefit of breaking down the frames, because once you have that, you can kind of go in and add extra stuff and like make it and fine tune the animation in ways, especially for me, because I have a 2D background. So I have less experience working with keyframes. So it was always nice to be able to go back at the end and add stuff like this. So it was really helpful. And there's little things like smears you can add in here and there. For example, I think I have it in this. Yeah, so this is when she kind of falls down. So little things like smears, you can also, after you finish your animation, kind of just add on top. That's a different layer as well, right? And it becomes, once you get to this stage, it becomes really kind of worthwhile having the rig, because then you can change, you can change small things here and there as you're making your project, and it really helps instead of having to, because it's non-destructive. Like I think we've talked about this before in other streams, but it's the non-destructive workflow is really helpful in terms of being able to change your mind and add small nuances to your.
It is, and you can also even change the lighting after the fact. Like, oh, I forgot to make her pants red. You could still do that, right? So.
That actually happened a lot, because halfway through I actually changed her design slightly. Oh, wow. So I ended up having to, so if I had done it frame by frame, it would be over. But I could always just go back to the rig, change the pants color or the shirt color and stuff like that, and it would just kind of all click. So it was really helpful I find the rigging workflow is really useful, and not just for full body movements, but you can even do smaller things like, so there's a shot here where, sorry, not this one. Yeah, the phone swipe. That's what I was looking for. So where does this thing go? Yeah. Oh yeah, it's in the wall, because this is the origin point. But so like in the opening minutes of the thing is her swiping her phone, and little things like this are a lot easier to. I find like you have the precision, especially in Quill, to get you can make sure everything kind of fits quite nicely around, like, because sometimes I've seen like in games and things like that where people are animating like characters holding objects, and it doesn't kind of feel as organic, because it's really hard to get the rigs to kind of perfectly like collide against the skin and stuff like that. So it was really helpful to have a workflow like this, because all I needed to do here was just animate a loop of her doing this, and then I could move it on a transform later in Unity. And things like so the screen itself too, that's also part of it, because Quill can export UVs, right? So what I did is I just got a plane and attached it to the transform of the whole object, and I exported this with UVs, so I could add like the thing scrolling on under it, because a lot of so it's like little things like that. Now, and I'll break down. You
actually use the UVs from the plane to slide the screen content?
Yes, because when you're exporting,
That's
right,
so
you can
smart.
just go like export UVs, and it's really useful.
I thought I thought you would have made it like with tracking markers and motion track it in Unity, and then paste like a texture on top. That's way simpler. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a really Quill. I found Quill is very versatile for things like that. Once you know how it all works together, because it saved me a bunch of compositing work in terms of having to.
That's
because
awesome.
Everything is in real time, and it's
Alex M is asking, did you use video references for animating? The animations look great, but I noticed some movements look almost like they were done frame by frame. So did you have any video references?
Yeah, it's bits and pieces. So what happened is, and this I'll get into this later, but we actually did some mocap on this. So what I was able to do is I was actually able to reference some of the movements were referenced with like the actual mocap actor. And so you notice some of them are done. Some of them don't have that. Some of them do, mostly because there is a lot of, how do I put this? There's a lot of friction with this set I found when I was animating stuff, because I kept changing things on the fly. So a lot of movements didn't work halfway through. But this is kind of some of those concessions you have to make at a certain point, because, like, for example, like the balcony wasn't this big, the bed was a different size and stuff like that. And I already started animating when halfway through we had to change the set due to the virtual production kind of setup, right? So you have all these, so you basically have a lot of movements that are kind of quickly adjusted to compensate for those changes. And it doesn't always, in cases like this, especially this scene, because this scene was kind of where I tested a lot of the workflow on. So a lot of things were kind of not fine-tuned going forward in here. So, but yeah, it's one of those kind of concessions I had to make. So occasionally, a lot of it was done with video reference, but a lot of it had to be quickly adjusted to fit the needs of the rest of the scene and the changes in the project. Because the whole film takes place in this scene, this set. So whenever I would kind of move to a different scene where, like, it's a different time of day and stuff, like, I always had to make sure I might have animated something in the past where I hadn't made this update to the set, and I had to go back and kind of compensate for that. It was, so yeah, there's some of the janky movements are a result of that. Others are just time. So,
right.
Yeah. Can
you actually zoom out a little bit? I want to see the balcony looked really cool. Like,
right, the balcony. So yeah, this.
Oh, that's super cool. I love the metal railing, man. Like the detail. Wow, that looks so cool. So simple, but it works so well.
Thanks. Yeah, it's
and
really
what happens if you go outside and look at the house? Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So this is what the film. So they went through a lot of changes. Before there was actually like the rest of the building. They had more characters and stuff like that too. But I ended up having to cut that down for time because the film was ending up like 10 minutes long. The final thing was 8 minutes long, but yeah, it's ended up like really long, and I had to cut a lot of it down. But so what I ended up doing here was just building out exactly what I needed for the film, because after I set up in Unity, I knew what was going to be on screen and what wasn't. So it was very easy to, like, okay, I only need to make this area of the building fairly detailed and stuff like that, and stuff like here. And even this, so these aren't the final assets, but I ended up only making like a couple of like foliage assets, and I was able to just populate them across like a scene to make a
flat
full.
Here.
They're very flat here, but then I mean, this isn't the final one either. But like once you take them into Unity, add lighting, rotate them around a bunch, duplicate them, it starts to really feel more.
Also, you use them as an asset and instance them in Unity, right, to keep it small.
They're essentially just prefabs here, but then they're
right.
And cool. There's a few things I had to do also, like, for example, things like the wires had to be separated because I had a creature who was going to climb on them. So I had to make sure I can move them in Unity after the fact to match the VFX stuff. So there's all these little considerations that went into the set building and stuff like that once it was. Yeah. But yeah, I think, sorry, let me just double check what's on my list. Okay, yeah. So the exporting process was just as simple as once you have your individual layers, you basically turn off everything else. So mostly just, set and then kind of isolate what you want to send out, which is maybe just the body the first time. Go here. And in this one, I use alembics. And the reason why is it turns out so in the last stream, I made a comment that alembics aren't the most performant, and that's still fairly true. But if you're using rigs and you're using a mostly non-destructive workflow, it's actually better in a lot of cases than FBX. FBX is, because most of my projects before this had been more real-time experiences, so FBX has worked better because I was only using them in small loop situation scenarios and not for this complicated of a character or lighting. But when I was doing something this, like with a film and characters and all these different models, the FBXs ended up being much slower for the process. So alembics actually proved to be better because it's not destructive, and basically I'm using the same geometry from start to finish. The interpolation between all of the frames is really smooth and it's really easy. So it doesn't end up expanding your file size a lot, and it also retains a lot. So I basically switched over for this project anyway to an alembic.
Well, the thing is, like, you still have to bake, but I think the big advantage is that alembic keeps the vertex IDs, right? So you can potentially even add motion blur if the geometry doesn't change. You can do post motion blur or like real time motion blur and stuff like that. But I'm guessing the files are still pretty large, right? Once you export.
They're still pretty large, yeah, but it's not as big as it would be with models this complicated as an FBX, right? Because it's one versus this case, you're still only exporting one mesh versus
one
FBX
container.
would be, it would be everything at once.
Yeah.
So it would just be that. Then linear. I usually use linear unless I'm going to Blender, then I use Gamma, and then export animation. It's that simple, and I hit that, and then from here I would I export them one by one, just that the phase 2, and then I go into Unity, and then that's where I assemble it. Yeah, so I'm gonna.
So would you, if you would go back to your first stream, would you still go with FBX, or would you now always use Alembic? I think
I would. I had a much easier time using rigs than animating frame by frame. So yeah, I think I'm squarely in Alembic's territory, depending on the project. If I were doing like a game or something where I needed this to run in real time, I would probably not use. I probably use FBXs, but I also would never use it for anything this complicated of an animation. It would be a simple loop, right? Something that could be done in like maybe 8 frames or something.
Right.
So because FBXs in general, I think perform better, especially in VR. So
if I understand this correctly, the FBX, whatever you do, it would export the full mesh every frame, whereas the Alembic is smart enough that if you didn't change anything in the mesh, it would just save the information of how the vertices moved in space. Yes,
exactly. And it really helps. And even in certain cases, for example, the face mesh actually does change. Like it's not the same from start to finish, but it's these are all flat strokes. They're so small that it's kind of insignificant in terms of the performance cost. It doesn't really change too much here because it's such a small thing.
Doron, is still one container. The only thing you can't do once the mesh changed is stuff like vertex motion blur, because then Alembic doesn't know, what was the mesh before, because it has different vertex IDs, right? So you can still export stuff that, like for example, if you had smear frames or something in there, you can still do that. But then there's certain options that are not working anymore because you changed vertex IDs within the same animation container. If that makes sense.
Right, got it.
Yeah. So this is that's basically been just a breakdown of how I approach the animations part in Quill for this, and then I'll show you how I basically kind of cheated in Unity to string all of these things together, because it's this whole film is not just, how do I put it? It was a huge experiment. So there's a lot of mixing and matching of different mediums and techniques to kind of make this work. And this whole thing was an experiment in how possible that was in terms of meshing VR animation with more traditional workflows. So I'm going to switch over to Unity now. Okay. So can you guys hear me? Can you guys still hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
And we can see it too.
Okay, great. Yeah. So what I'm just going to do is, so this is the broom in Unity now.
Nice.
I'm gonna pull it. So this is with lighting. This is all that stuff. It's really, as you can see, it kind of feels very different than.
Yeah, but it still feels painterly. Like if you leave it here, for example, it just looks like a digital painting. It's awesome.
Thanks. Yeah. And I'll break down how I got from what you saw in Quill to this. After, a lot of it is still the same as what I did in the previous stream, but I'll show you the extra layers I figured out to kind of achieve this look that it is right now. But first things first, what I want to show is, and this is what really saved me a lot of time in the process, was the whole scene actually plays back in Unity, at least for the most part. There's occasional glitches, but I can play the whole scene back as it is. As the clip is. So what you're seeing here, cool, minus post-processing effects here and there, is essentially the same as the final product.
Wow.
And the amount of work that relieves is huge, because see there's glitches like this here and there. So it's not perfect when you're playing it back, because these are still really heavy files at the end of the day, but it saves you so much work in the long run, because you can previs all the stuff in in real time because, for example,
You can see it all in context.
you can see it all in context. So like, for example, all of these things you're seeing here, these are all the individual tracks for each shot of the film. So like these are, so what I can do is I can actually edit them like as I'm, you can change them, you can change how they look. Because what they're doing is they're storing kind of camera information for, there's only one camera in the scene, but these things are storing kind of camera data. So you can kind of position your cameras exactly where you want using these little items here. So I'm going to just isolate them real quick so you can kind of see. So they're just like these little empty boxes, but you can store the camera information there. And what this track will do, it will tell, whenever the track is there, basically it tells the main camera to switch to this data point using this is a plugin called Cinemachine. It's built into Unity now, and it's really helpful because you can basically edit your film in real time, and that allows you so much because you can see now once I switch this new shot, it's just a head. Like it's just her head now. The rest of her body doesn't really show up.
Mildly disturbing, but
yeah. And then
so to understand correctly, what the plugin does is you can place cameras, but it also has the camera information in each marker, and then basically the camera jumps to that. But it's also you can also slide it in times that you can make one shot longer. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah. So like the shot, like when I leave it, it's just empty, right? So there's no camera information.
Yeah.
When I pull this one out here, it switches to this. It's like the next shot already. So
and that is just a plugin, you say?
That's a plugin. It's built in. You can actually just, so once you open up Unity, you can actually just, pull up its, that's not good.
That's cool.
It's package manager here. So, oh no. But yeah, it's on this side here. So you can just kind of hit the check mark and download it completely free. So yeah. So
cool.
what I'm going to do is I'm going to close Quill for a bit because it's slowing down my computer. So I'm going to just close it because I have basically 2 huge apps on at the moment. But yeah, so that's how it works. I'm going to just undo the editing. But as you can see, yeah, once I hit the end of this clip and she reacts, it changes to her full body now. So and you can see that she's in the floor, but knowing where everything is, you can hide a lot of these seams because it looks like well put together, apart from the glitches when it's all edited and timed. But like behind the scenes, you can kind of see all the mistakes and all the kind of insecurities because this wasn't animated. Like it wasn't fully, because I knew like knowing once again the storyboard is always good because you know where you don't have to do any work, where you have to put a lot of effort. So you don't have to animate everything perfectly to scale into the room. Also because you want to make things, you don't want to necessarily make it realistic. You want to make it do what's best for the storytelling at that time. So like having her body be more extreme in terms of like pulling itself out of the thing is actually better in this case than having to do it realistically because it wouldn't have the same impact this shot has when she pops up. So it's things like that this workflow kind of allows you to do. Oh. But yeah, so the second part of this, a big part of this whole film is this kind of motion capture. So this film I was fortunate enough to work on. It's like do this whole film with a motion capture like actress and even able to film this in real time. So this entire shot where she walks in is probably the first use of motion capture we implemented as part of because we wanted to see how well it would work with Quill, and it works surprisingly well in terms of like how it works. So what you're seeing now is this is at this point I've switched entirely to mocap, and you can see obviously it's a lot more smoother than stuff I can personally achieve in Quill. I mean, some people are really good at Quill, so they can probably get stuff that looks like this. But it's really smooth in terms of how the body is really natural. The hair is kind of flowing very naturally too. And you have all these curves and like deformations to the body that you don't have with the Quill model. And all I'm doing is by the time we get to that second shot, I'm swapping back to the Quill mesh. So I tried to match the pose closely, but not always perfect. But thankfully with magic of editing, you don't notice it too much.
To understand the workflow, you still use the Quill meshes, exported it to, I'm guessing, Motion Builder something, right?
Yes.
To do the motion capture. Then you will import the motion capture data, and it also still maintains the vertex colors from the Quill mesh. And then you import it the motion capture data back into Unity, right?
Yeah, so it's motion builder is hooked up. We shot all this, and so there was actually a cameraman filming this. So this camera move as well is also motion captured. So you do all that, and then
So
you bake
basically,
it
you
up.
had so in the motion capture stage, you basically build like boxes and stuff where she can sit on. You had a kind of where the door is and stuff like that. Did you have like a virtual or like a physical reference set with a door, or was she basically
Yeah.
acting in
Okay,
in
so
the
it was
air?
so the beauty of having this set, which is why the set was built kind of first, was because it allowed us to map the set's dimensions to a real space. So we had the kind of like you said, just markers around the room and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So the actress could kind of have the context of where everything is. We didn't have everything, like we didn't have a full door. We just had like a sort of like a lever type thing where she could just pull. So she was pulling on a physical kind of
Oh, that's
object to
cool.
kind of get the motion as well. So there's all these
Was
little
there
things.
a real table?
There was. Yeah, there also was a
Okay.
real table. So like later in the film, there's more contextual and stuff like that happens too. But it's
So, for example, when she takes off the headphones, right?
oh,
is
okay.
that-
So that's one of the things I want to break down. So
Okay.
taking off the headphones is actually, so from the back it looks fairly natural, but it's not actually. You can't. The setup we're using couldn't mocap fingers, right? Nor face at the time. So this actually had to be done in Quill by hand. So what I did was I basically kind of built a pseudo rig for her hand here with a bunch of just general states for like grabbing, reaching, all that stuff. So what happens is, and you can see it more clearly here, but what happens is once her hand reaches there, it's not even like hitting the right spot. But because we're behind her, I didn't need to bother cleaning it up too much. So what happens is it switches right here to like the grabbing pose. And from the angle we're watching, you don't really notice that she's not holding it properly. And then when she drops it, it snaps to another free hand pose. So it's basically just a lot of it's just basically me swapping out these kind of
Wow, that sounds
poses.
very complicated because you can't bring the motion capture data back into Quill, right? So you would have to have those poses pre-made and swap them in the Unity asset, I guess, right?
Yeah, it was. Poses? So this is a lot of the turning on and off is in Unity. I think it's somewhere here under the VFX layer.
Wow.
So a bunch of it is one of these layers. And probably under final animations. But
the headphones were also animated in Quill then? Or?
The headphones were made in Quill, but what I did is I separated the layers in ways where I could control the transforms, because you have kind of the three parts. You have this, and that. There's no FK or IK in Quill, right? So you kind of have to fake that too here. It's like there's the hierarchy starting from here, and then you can just, so once I parent this to the right, it moves everything, but I can also move and adjust the transforms of these two so it feels like it's colliding with her head as she's pulling it off.
So that is animated in Unity.
That's animated in Unity, but just with the Quill set. Some of it, like I occasionally do things like subtle wobbles, like so there's like a loop animation of like the object itself wobbling in Quill, but that has to be something. It's always like localized animations. It can't be.
I see.
It can't be like full-fledged.
Wow,
because it's hard.
Wow, that's a lot of planning.
It's a lot of planning. It's especially I mean, it's the beauty of the luck of this is like because these are kind of hacks you have to know, because once again I was the only person who had to do basically every step of this production.
It's absolutely impressive. Like looking at this, I was like, I have a lot of questions. Like, how did you do this? And knowing what you do. I mean, it's all fakery, but it's like genius fakery, right? Like, because you do it all to what you need, and you don't waste time on stuff you don't see, and that's also a lot of that's a big trap that a lot of animators run into, right? Like you do too much, and then in the end shot, you don't even see it. So from behind, it looks perfect. She's just taking it off, It's amazing.
And then also the actress, I think I forgot to give her the note to I think we had a bit of a calculation offset here. So the table here is actually a lot closer to the wall than we thought. So with the translation, it feels like she just drops it. So I had to lean into that and just have her throw it on the side. Here with the animation.
It totally works. That's cool.
So it's just so there's all these little funny kind of happy accidents that happen as a result of that. But it's for the most part, it's the audience doesn't really notice in the meantime because it's happening so quickly, right? So you can get away with quite a lot.
And did you have to do a lot of cleanup work on the mocap itself?
Yeah, I
or-
had to do a bit, but it wasn't. Fortunately, it wasn't too extensive because we could. What happened was we actually were able to use this model in real as we were mocapping it, so we could kind of see where the issues would line and kind of make adjustments before as the mocap was happening. So a lot of it was it saved me a lot of work, but yeah, I still had to do some of the manual cleanup in. I just use there's this software called Cascador. It's this physics-based animation system. It's very good for this kind of thing. So I kind of played around with it a little bit, and it helped me clean up some of the jank there. But yeah, it's not always like 100%. You know, especially with having to do both sides with Quill Unity made it really tricky to do everything. So it was kind of a matter of cutting my losses certain places. And then there's things that also help sell it, like for example the hair. So the hair is actually rigged. It has bones inside for each strand, and that's why and so what I do is there's a plugin I'm using that called Magica Cloth. It basically allows you to simulate dynamic things like hair and clothes. So what I'm doing is I've simulated the hair, and now this is the actual. So what I did, I simulated the hair, and then I baked down the movements so I can play them back and kind of control the parameters each time. The only thing I couldn't do that for was the shirt. And the reason why was simply because, so the shirt is, when I made it in Quill, and then let me show you what that looks like here. So in Quill, the shirt is basically just a bunch of overlapping strokes, right? And yeah, so I put them side by side. This is the original one, the one in Quill here. And what you'll notice is, let me see if I can, oh no, what just happened? Oh, did I put I accidentally closed the yeah. So yeah, you can see that you can kind of see the individual strokes here. So when you try to simulate that, the simulation can't simulate this all as one object because it's not one mesh.
Right.
So what happened if you try to simulate it? It'll like all the individual strokes will kind of fall to the floor, and the whole thing falls apart. Yeah. So what I had to do was basically I basically did some quick retopology over the shirt, the Quill version of the shirt, and I baked it down to a texture in Blender. So the vertex color is now a texture here. And that's applied onto this shirt. So that way, because the shirt is now one mesh, right? And so it can be simulated properly and still look pretty much identical to the final one in place. So it's a lot of like tricky, like I said, really tricky specific things that you have to do almost like on a per shot basis, because techniques like this don't always work everywhere. It's kind of it's very contextual, but a lot of, like I said, a lot of little things were done on this process to make it all happen. Like, and this is also its own shader, so I can adjust, like, I can adjust things like what color the shadow is or how bright it is, stuff like that. So it's a whole thing.
That's
how that's really, man. The thing that's really striking here is the amount of the range of knowledge, artistic and technological, that goes like that you have to have at the tip of your fingers to pull this off, because like you say, every solution is almost like unique, a unique mix. It's amazing.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's like one superpower you have, Edward, is that, knowledge of animation, knowledge of painting, but knowledge of technical things like mocap, cleanup, and shaders, and real time, and editing, and everything, right? Like that's actually, very admirable too, that you have that, and you're still super young. It's like pretty impressive, man. Like amazing stuff.
I appreciate that. Yeah, thanks. It's I find this is all like a game dev, because game development is kind of like this, where you're constantly fixing solutions, and like everything kind of has to be done custom. So I found that's like, especially doing in a game engine, there's always like, you can just quickly go online and kind of learn how people have approached this kind of thing before. Like for example, this texture, the Twitter thing. So the basic up and down animation is, I showed you that in Quill. So what I did is I parented that to another object, and I just have that walking. So it's basically just a disembodied hand kind of walking towards the the door. And basically I just try to time. So what I'm trying to, let me see if I can isolate the texture here. Yeah, so this is the UV'd version. It's also alembic. And that's only just because of the up and down motion. So it's not actually, it's only just logging in the loop of it going slightly up and down with her hand. And what's happening here is,
so for the slide, you're keyframing in Unity the UV coordinates.
Exactly, yeah. Because the image is basically just this, like one long scroll already. But what I did is I just mapped it to here. And these are the kind of tiling settings. And as I animate them, wait, sorry, I have to select this one. But if you look here, these numbers here, you notice that they're changing.
Mm. Oh,
that's basically
yeah.
me animating them to kind of fake a scroll.
That's so funny.
And it saves some. And I found you can actually take this even further. Like for if you were to simulate something like water coming through, you can also texture map it in a way like this to kind of get really
yeah.
So it's like a cheap way to do kind of simulations, and so it's really
it gives me some ideas for sure. Yeah, this is awesome.
Yeah,
I might try something like that.
Yeah, no, it's really fun. Like this, like I said, this whole film was like, there's a reason why you're not seeing there's no one unified way of making this whole film, because the whole thing was kind of an experiment. I wanted to see how far I could kind of push the tool set and break how many things at the end of it. So yeah, it has her fall. And even things like, for example, her phone beeps, she gets a text message, and then she kind of comes up and then it pops up here. That is basically just like a PNG that's placed close to the camera. Yeah. Or it could even be UI, but I end up doing it this way because there's moments later in the film where I wanted these PNGs to be kind of like in 3D space. So
and that is something you would do in Unity, and that's not a quill stroke, right?
That's not a quill stroke. This is just an image. Like this is just like a Photoshop image I just placed into the scene like any other object, like a 3D object. But yeah, then she jumps and then lands and all that stuff. And yeah, I think this scene, I probably had the least time to work on this scene because there's this kind of thing where you kind of make a scene quickly so you can kind of figure out what your workflow is. So that this was kind of that scene, but so you can kind of see why that's why everything kind of was tested in this scene. But then there's other little smoke and mirrors things that happen here too. So for example, the lighting. So it's really subtle, but like this light here, like it turns off after a certain point. And that's because as the timeline is moving, like I need to make the shots look more cinematic. So when I pull out here, right, I don't want you to notice this. Like I don't want you to be looking at the stuff in the back. So the light here is just kind of make it more volumetric, so it has more depth, and you focus on the area in the middle. So when I cut further back, I turn it off so that it doesn't continue that.
Sure, that's here. A cone, yeah.
So there's all these little small kind of smoke and mirrors tricks to do that. And also like, so this is where the creature shows up, right? But it's not even like a full forest. It just implies one. So I don't know if you guys remember I had a piece where this creature was kind of sitting and looking over the
in the rain.
Yeah, so this is basically the same set. This is the exact same environment. I just it's just taken into
put a frame around it.
Exactly. So it's like here I'm even reusing assets from the whole thing.
So it looks like this set, the building has a little bit more detail than what you showed before, and you also have some adjacent buildings and stuff. Those are all like Quill buildings, and you just extended the set so it looks nicer in larger framing.
Yeah, so everything here is Quill, but also like this is I basically added one plane and like a bunch of like scribbles to kind of give this an effect, because it was kind of up in the air for a while what this section of the building was going to be, because in the first draft there was another character who lived opposite this character and stuff like that, right? So this was kind of a last minute patch. And even these windows, they aren't windows. So they're actually just flat planes painted in Quill to look. Funny. But because like the only time you see them, you're this far away, like
because in your Quill file that you showed us, it was still windows, right? I think.
Yeah. So at that certain point, I just realized, okay, there's no point because we're never going to see this section after I had assembled stuff like this together. So it's little things like that. Even like here, like these buildings, I know how far you're going to be from them. So they're pretty simple prefabs. The lighting kind of carries a lot of it. And like I told you, like, those weren't the final trees. I ended up going with something more like kind of less rigid, because I find if your strokes are too clean with like things like foliage, it doesn't sell it if you're not perfect
Yeah.
with how it doesn't sell as well. So I thought, let me go with something more impressionistic. And there's
That's
actually
super
only
cool.
three. No, there's actually only two tree assets here.
Just duplicated,
Just
rotated, and
duplicated and
instanced,
rotated,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And it holds up from like the angles you view it from, and it makes everything look further than it is. Like even that, I'm not gonna zoom all the way there, but like that is not that far away. It's
Oh,
just
that's funny.
it just feels far because of how it's laid out in Quill. So there's kind of, even though it's all 3D space, there's kind of still a 2D approach to everything.
Yeah.
And it saves you a lot of work because because now you can keep perfect track of where you like
Yeah,
how
what I
you
usually do sometimes for that stuff, I just also like keep the foliage closer and make it smaller, so it looks like
Yeah.
it's further away. So
That's smart.
yeah,
That's really smart.
it's
Actually.
funny what you can do. Yeah.
Yeah. And also the same thing with the skybox. The skybox is painted in Quill as well. You basically just take a 360 screenshot
Oh,
or cube
nice.
map, depending on how you want to lay out your scene, and slap it to
Yeah.
the sky. So there's all these small little techniques. Like this also here is just to cast shadows. Like there's a bunch of like I said, smoke and mirrors here just to make this work. And so the creature here in this instance is mocap. Most of it is not, but like in this one shot, because we realized halfway through that the creature is essentially it's basically human because it's an ape, right? It's like very similar bones to humans. So like the VR producer on this project actually ended up just putting on a mocap suit and doing this, and he's just crawling on a pole, and it's the funniest thing. And this is one of those
Oh,
moments
there was
where
actually a poll.
yeah, we had like a little pole thing, and
That's
he's just
funny.
climbing across it. And this is one of those moments where like I could have cleaned up the mocap, but I was really tired. So I essentially just used the foliage to block off the contact
Nice.
points
Yeah,
on the hand. So you don't
that's how you
notice
do it.
and you don't think about it. And then here, this is to me the most important innovation of like this whole project for me, because you can mix motion capture and Quill. For example, so the eyes are entirely Quill. Like they're really subtle movements here, but you can actually slap on like Quill animated faces onto mocap or rigged models. So what that allows you to do is you can kind of get these more precise 2D performances, because I kind of knew on this project I would be spread so thin that I'd only be able to like animate some parts really precisely to what I wanted. So like I try to focus a lot of my effort on like the facial expressions and stuff like that, and
The question about that, how do you combine? Like, I'm struggling to understand. So you do the mocap and clean it up, then you bring it into Unity. But how do you get the eye animation from Quill on top of the mocap? If
Okay,
you know what I mean.
so yeah, that's pretty straightforward. Let me pull out let me see if I can find the model. Ooh, come on. There he is. Yeah, so this is that's the creature. So this is the rigged version of the creature. As you can see, he has no face.
Yeah.
Right, but all I needed to do was so let me find the. So what you do is, so you kind of have to open up the rig and like place the face, like the Quill face. So what you do is, because in Quill I basically animated the face on the origin point,
Oh, okay.
and then what I was able to do is you can basically watch, like, so in Unity I could actually just watch the timeline and be like, okay, this is how many frames I have. And it doesn't even need to be perfect, because you can. So what I did here is, if you notice for this eye movement, it's a really short clip. It's not even that long. But what I did is, because there's two now. Oh no. Let me turn off one. So what happens is you can actually stop the clip. Like you can have it loop sometimes. You can have it stop, hold, or play back. So what you can do is,
I see.
you can essentially just, and that's what I do for a lot of this project, is I would animate these kind of canned expressions, because I know there's things like blinking or like, like reacting to something really fast that the characters will always do. So what I do is I can have like just these animations pre-baked and ready to go, and I could just edit them on the timeline to look natural. So I can stop and hold at certain points, because it darts his eyes one more time. So like I basically animated him darting his eyes left and then right, but then I spaced it out in a way that it feels more like he's taking time to look at stuff, and it's really simple.
Nice.
It's that simple, and you can just kind of. So I'm going to reset the transform of this guy.
So basically, the face you import, it snaps onto what you're doing right now, right? You just position it onto the face, and then it follows the rig.
Yeah, I usually don't do this in Unity because like I always try to like leave whenever I'm in the model I rig, I always leave like something to represent the transform. So I don't have to like manually do. I can just like reset the transform to match, and it'll perfectly snap to the face because it's the same model in Quill. There's no I didn't do any retopology on this. This is the exact same model in Quill rigged. It's just I took out the eyes so I could animate them when I was rigging it, and you slap them back, and it really it's amazing how much mileage you can get from this. Because I'm somebody who I love animation, but I rarely have time to do it properly. And I'm working on, because I always find myself working on multiple projects simultaneously. So I'd rather spend my time on doing the more the bigger picture parts of the project than I would trying to spend another few hours trying to make a perfect shot. So I find hybrid things like this help me, because if I want to quickly pitch something, I can use some motion capture, or just something rigged like a run cycle or something, and I can animate the face, because to me the face is where a lot of the performance is carried, and if you can get those parts really well done in kind of like a 2D, because animating things like this in Quill this is still frame by frame, there's no rigging here, so it's a very 2D kind of feeling to it. It's not like I'm not using blend shapes or anything. I'm just frame by frame making it feel and look how I want, so it allows me that level of precision and focus on for the faces, and not have to worry about how do I sculpt the geometry in a perfect way that the mouth feels real,
Absolutely. Super cool.
For the body animation, you're able to actually sort of blend between animation done in Quill and animation done in with a motion capture, or is it like two separate things and you have to cut?
They're two separate things. It's like you have to, for example, you can see it most clearly earlier when she's falling to her, when she's going to her chair. These are two separate animations completely. They're just, I kind of referenced as closely as I could in Quill to make it match, but even then it wasn't perfect, So they're two separate things. And
at what point do you swap? Which frame is where you swap?
Let me find it. It's usually defined by the cut point on this.
I see.
So it's so things like that.
Oh wow, it's pretty good though.
It works. I feel like once you have an organic, natural cut, or I find it's not just a matter of cutting, but it's also where. What the character is doing when you cut, because by this point in time,
totally.
I feel like the audience is expecting a change in composition because it's been such a long shot.
Yeah, but it's also you're cutting in a fast motion, right? So you get away with a lot of if it's not perfect, it's just like SXVA transitions, right? From idle to punch or something. Totally. If you cut in a fast motion, you don't notice I don't see it, even if in one shot you can't see it. You can't.
Yeah, it's pretty good as it is.
It doesn't look too bad in terms of the transition. So
if I didn't know, I wouldn't notice anything.
Yeah, and that is not to say that you can't. You can totally use this whole. So I don't want to get the misconception that you can't do this whole project with Quill stuff. You can, and it will play back smoothly, probably even more coherently, because there's essentially two animation styles here. There's even things you can do to if you're using mocap, you can do things to lower the frame rate of the mocap. So it's more in line with what you do in Quill, but I ended up just keeping it separate because I kind of like I'm a big fan of showing your your imperfections. I'm a big fan of I know to me I like it's like stop motion, on what's it called? There's some Wes Anderson films where the characters have fur and you can kind of see the fingerprints of the animators as they're talking on the fur, because they can't really control how the fur is going to react.
Only.
So I just thought let me keep it in, because also there's this nice play of reality, and there's moments where I want it to feel very cartoony, and there's moments where I want it to feel real. It's a recurring motif in the film. I can't show you here because it's not the whole film, but every time there's one of these shots where the camera is kind of following her, like a track shot like this, it's kind of it's almost like the film keeps checking in with these track shots to see where her mental state is. So it becomes more and more like gritty with each time you see this kind of shot. And to me, I found the realism of the shot helps bring that out a lot, because the actress really, like, all of those nuances that she can get that will take me hours to get, myself frame by frame, it gives it a certain life that it wouldn't otherwise have. Because this project is, apart from this creature, of course, the project is very grounded. It's all inside one room. So I find having that element actually works in the favor of this project, and not only just saves me time as like an entire production team, but also adds like to the narrative and themes. So yeah.
The final product is a 2D output, right? Just what we see on the right side. Yeah. And question: where can we see the film? Is it doing the festival rounds right now, or?
Yeah, so it's at the end of starting September, late September. I forgot the exact date, September 22 till like the first week of October, but it will be screening at the Ottawa International Animation Festival.
Oh, nice!
Thanks.
Yeah,
it's
awesome.
Part of the student competition.
Congrats!
So. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited for you guys to see. If you don't check it there, I will probably release it afterwards online.
Yes, really please do so.
Because I've also released, like, I really want people to get there. To me, I do a lot of my projects are kind of experiments. I want to like try out a lot of these tool sets and see how just see what's possible with the tools. And I released basically everything I've used to make this film. Like most of the shaders are the main shader for this film is basically already available. I posted it on the chat, so you can actually already take your Quill creations into Unity and do stuff like this if you want. But speaking of, I should probably do a breakdown of I wanted to actually break down the environment a little bit to show you what kind of how I achieved this look. So if you guys remember that detail layer I talked about in the walls. So the way that's done is, so what that detail layer does is it essentially, how you have like normal maps and bump maps and stuff like that to kind of tell the model where it needs to be more, like how it should take light and stuff like that. I used the painterly strokes in a similar way, but it's kind of like a distortion map almost. It tells, like, it basically says this is where it can be more loose and painterly. Because when you're painting in 2D, right, you have kind of brush strokes blend into each other, and it creates this really unique feel that 3D doesn't quite have because everything is a singular polygon, right? So what I'm doing here is, I'm going to find a second. So you see I can actually turn off that effect. So now it's kind of just what you had in Quill. It still looks good, by itself. But like right now, it just kind of looks like what I had in Quill, but dynamically lit. But once I turn on this extra layer of kind of distortion, I don't know if it's coming through clearly.
It's hard to see, but
like, sorry, I'm lost again. But yeah, you can kind of see like, there's like,
it looks a bit more pronounced, if that's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a bit more like, there's kind of like a certain level of like, there's like a fuzziness it adds on top of the same thing with the ground. It's the reason why the ground has this kind of brushy look.
Oh, that's
instead
cool.
of just being quite, because I can probably turn it off in a sec. So you can kind of see what the ground looks like. So this is what it looks like now. It's more cell shaded, more flat. But then there's those detail strokes are basically a map for like, okay, you want these parts of the strokes to feel more, brushy and loose. So it kind of creates this painterly look. And I found it works really well in cases like this. And like, you can see it working in tandem with this. For example, this is the painted in ambient occlusion shadow, right? But it makes the scene have more depth than if it was just flat. Because like I can change the lighting. Because another thing about, like, when I said real time, I really wasn't joking. Like, this whole scene is like real time. Like every single aspect of it is dynamic. I didn't bake the lighting or anything because I wanted to really see how, apart from the fact that there's just some settings, some things aren't incompatible because this is a kind of custom workflow in Unity. But a lot of this is all fully changeable in real time. There's layers of, like, I can even reveal them for a second. There's lights, there are point lights and stuff like that, and all sorts of volumetric beams to kind of make this look more pretty and more cinematic in general. So it's a hodgepodge of kind of techniques. Even here, so you kind of have like some sort of bounce light off the ground here. That isn't actually bounce light. It's It's a point light. I forget which one it is. Yeah, it's probably this one. So it's a point light that's placed here, but the shader is kind of designed to be more of like closer to like using Photoshop in 3D, not really like to handle all the lighting. You just kind of to allow you to paint with lighting almost. So this point light here is essentially faking the indirect bounce light on the surface, because Quill, like I said, the mesh you get from Quill isn't perfect for lighting when you start. So being able to like use the lighting intentionally, it allows a lot of really unique results. Because I've created things like this in PBR settings, and there's a certain vibe, there's a hand painted feeling to this that I just haven't seen anywhere else. It's something really strong about this.
I don't think it exists. I don't think something like that exists. I've never seen painterly like this done in real time. This is amazing.
Thanks. Yeah, and Angora, I know you mentioned that you asked if, like you said, this is the 2D output, but yeah, this whole film was designed to be a 2D output, but it is possible to view this in VR.
Nice.
So I'm gonna just kind of a little surprise for you guys. I'm gonna pop into this scene in VR so you guys can see what that looks like. Let's hope nothing breaks. So give me one moment to just hit play, and you'll see.
But then if I would ask, would it run on a Quest? That's a different story.
That's a very different story. Let's see, is it loading? Should be. Okay, there we go, we're loading. So let me see if I can do a free aspect ratio. So yeah.
Oh shit.
Yeah, so these are my hands. There she is.
Oh wow.
Real-time room scale. Yeah, and she'll be ahead in a second. There we go. Yeah, this was actually part of how we previs the show. So like sometimes when the actors were acting, I was in VR in a scene like this.
Oh
like,
wow.
Checking out seeing them so I could be in the room as they're acting without like physically impeding them.
Oh, that's so sick.
Yeah, and it creates
amazing.
A lot of it's a really fun way to like explore and experience like your
So you would actually, instead of seeing the actress, you actually already see your character in this room?
Yes.
In real time?
In real time.
Man.
Yeah, so Motion Builder was hooked up to Unity, so you can do that. Can I? Oh yeah, there's a wall. I have to face through the wall so I can get around the glass.
Oh, that's funny.
But yeah, you can, it's really cool. Like it's a really cool way. It's probably possible to optimize this for PTVR. This one is not optimized at all right now, but I'm in the wall again. But it's possible to do that if you wanted to. But what I like about this is it holds up. Like it pretty much looks exactly as it does on screen. It doesn't. There's very.
Yeah, I'm assuming it looks better, right? Like I feel like VR always looks better than what you see on screen.
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely. Like you can
right?
see the details more clearly. Like there's a lot more like the expressionism comes through, I think. And like one thing I really like about this is it's not like, even though it is a set, it doesn't kind of feel artificial. It feels like a place. So
yeah, I would love it if once it's released, if you have like a bonus like set that we could dive in.
I'll see what I can do. I can probably like optimize this enough to like, I'll probably make probably a janky build, but yeah, I can make this possible to look around and just inhabit the scene. Maybe just have a loop of her chilling here or something. Yeah, because I really wish everyone could try this out. It's really amazing to be able to walk through your worlds in VR, rather than just watch them behind a scene. But
even without the VR, even like just on screen, to be able to move around in this is already exciting. In VR, obviously even more so.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. It's really awesome. So I've made most of the tools available. It's like, it's harder to like give the whole tool set away because some of this stuff is, like you said, you need to kind of know a bunch of stuff to make it work. But I'm hoping like the shader is half the battle. Like everything you're seeing here is using essentially two shaders. Like there's just two materials for everything. And because Quill has vertex color, you can essentially just like you don't need to texture map or anything. It's just you apply the material tweak the settings, and you can get things that look like this. So I'm hoping,
Yeah, but you definitely have like, the range of knowledge required to actually do something like this is definitely not to underestimate for sure. Really cool, really cool stuff, man. Awesome.
Thanks. Yeah, so that's basically my presentation. I'm still available for questions if you guys have any specific. I know it's really a lot, so like if you have a lot of questions or anything specific, then nothing is too. We'll answer everything.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the stream. I don't see any questions in the chat.
I have a question.
Okay.
So now that you've done this big, amazing experiment, if you had to do this film again or something like it, would you do it the same way, or would you say animation assets are fine in Quill, but animation is better done elsewhere, or any other conclusion like that?
That's a good question. I don't know yet, because it's like, I think it's kind of like it's a case by case thing, because in general, hello, can you guys hear me? Oh.
Yes.
Okay, you can hear me. Okay, great. Sorry, my other earphones just died, so I was a little concerned. I'd say it depends. For example, I did another. I'll try to open it up so you guys can see what that one looks like. But I did another recent experiment with. I did another recent experiment with a different character, and I'll show you. I'll try to import them now quickly. But I find VR animation there's still a lot of merit to like being able to do stuff in Quill. Like some of my favorite parts in this are like the parts that are done. Like there's a certain like this stop motion quality. I'm really a fan of it. Like I really like the feeling of it being hand done and all that stuff. So for me, it's not so much that I don't think either one is better in that sense. I just find it's to me, whenever I can sit down and like, take the time to animate something in Quill, it's more of it's something that's something a bit luxurious on my end. It's like in terms of like how much time I'm able to really just focus on that stuff. So like if I had the time and to do it, I would probably always pick to do it by hand, because I really prefer how it feels and how it looks. But I found mocap and all that to be really useful in a lot of cases. I found a lot of value for that, because apart from the fact that like to me the one benefit of using motion capture or like animating with a rig is that you can like each shot basically I have to export like 3 sets of animations in from Quill. It's harder to, but whereas with mocap and stuff like that, I can actually just use one model and apply different animations to that pure rig. So it's a lot, to me, the reusability adds a lot of mileage, and a lot of like you can be really dynamic with it too. Even for game development stuff, you can't really tween alembics. As far as I know, you can't really tween alembic, because I tried to do that a lot with this project. See if I could, tween the motions between two animation sets in this project, but it wasn't quite possible. It wasn't as.
I saw somebody doing it. I forgot who it was, but
might have been
doing it pretty successfully in Blender, like the tweening. I don't know if Unity has these capabilities.
I don't think Unity, because Unity has just basic support for alembics. Like so this is kind of the import settings. It's just So it's not. I don't think
much.
It wouldn't do much beyond
Sparse.
that. But probably in other things you can. I know. I've seen a lot of cool artists actually use alembics really extensively, but I find I'm also the kind of person who I kind of like to make projects where I can reuse elements of them. So like for example, I could end up reusing this scene or the assets in the scene for like a real-time project or even another project. I can repurpose all of these assets because there's a billion like little details and stuff I put into this thing and nobody really sees throughout the film, right? Like there's like
It's funny.
So there's all these little things that no one really sees, and I like being able to reuse them. So like there's the ability to, reusability I found is a huge thing now, especially because what I like about things like Quill and VR and workflows like this is it kind of empowers independent artists. You don't need, I think this film is proof that you don't really need a full team of people to make something that's kind of, because this is probably the biggest project I ever worked on. It's about 8 minutes. It's a really long. Yeah, the full film is 8
Yeah.
minutes. This is just the first scene. There's about, let me see. Yeah, this is, yeah, there's like 3 other scenes.
Nice.
It's a whole thing. And
Yeah, thank you so much, Edward. This was awesome.
thank you all for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.